So 1 second, we can switch the camera off.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to webinar on 3D instrumented gait and motion analysis. We thank you for your participation and we appreciate it. I'm your host. My name is Deepak Shah and I am CEO of Biotech. And we have two speakers here. I just briefly give you an introduction. One is Dr. Poonam Bajaj. She has recently completed 20 years as physiotherapist. She completed her undergraduate studies from Kohas Manipal in April 2000. She then pursued her postgraduate diploma in rehabilitation from All India Institute of Physical Medicine and Rehab, Mumbai in 2002. She has done observership at the Parkinson Center of Oregon, USA in 2007 and then again in 2016. She is also certified in gait and motion analysis from the CCMC, USA. She completed her MPT in 2015. She has presented several national and international papers, including one at the World Parkinson's Congress in 2016 on post-traumatic Parkinsonism. Currently, she is consultant at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital in Mumbai. She is also chief investigator of a research project on gait and motion analysis of Parkinsonian syndromes. Our next resource person is Dr. Ankita Pramanik. She is an associate consultant physiotherapist in Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital and Research Center. She is working with Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and Sports Medicine since September 2014. She has completed her bachelor's in physiotherapy and master's in clinical and sports biomechanics from Manipal College of Allied Health Sciences, Manipal University. She has done further specialization in clinical biomechanics from Robert Gordon University, UK. She has experience in performing detailed three-dimensional gait and motion analysis in the laboratory in patients with neurological conditions, orthopedic conditions, in runner sports, specific movement. Along with me, my colleague, Mr. Rajiv Talati, who is my business partner, is also one of the panelists, and Dr. Mayank Thakkar, who has organized this webinar, and he's also working as a consultant physiotherapist with Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital. I welcome all, and I request Dr. Ankita to please start the webinar. During the webinar, you can ask your questions. Please ask your question in Q&A section so that it will be easier for our resource person to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Welcome, Dr. Ankita.
Thank you, Mr. Deepak Shah, for such a warm welcome. Thank you for the introduction. At present, we are sitting in Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital Gait Lab. This is the best place which we could choose to conduct a gait webinar. I'll be just switching to my presentation. Just give me a moment, please. Is everyone able to see the screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. So today's contents of the webinar is first thing is the process of recording, how we record a gait study. Then is the reporting part, wherein I'll be discussing a bit on what we are supposed to see in a gait report. The third part is the interpretation part, and then comes the clinical application part, which will be taken up by Dr. Poonam Bajaj. Okay, so before we get into the process of gait analysis, I just wanted to give a little overview on how did the evolution of gait analysis happen. So it started back in 1890s, wherein two German anatomists, they did a lot of research and published papers on the biomechanics of human gait. Then in early 90s, in 1900s, they started doing a lot of human and animal locomotion by capturing image sequences. So basically that time the videography and photography started evolving. Then in 1970s, video camera systems were used to identify pathological gait, what we at present we say what is called as the observational gait analysis. And then in 1980s, gait results gait studies were conducted in proper labs, wherein the gait results were used for planning the treatment and also in a lot of surgeries. Now, to set up a gait lab, what are the requirements? What are the things you need to set up a gait lab? First is space. So you need a good length of walkway wherein the person will have to walk, will have a good, the length of walkway has to be good. Then also the ceiling height has to be very good, because when you're doing any kind of sports analysis wherein you have jumping or tennis activity, all these things you need a considerable height. Then the gait analysis, gait and motion analysis software, that is very important. Then is the infrared cameras, then the force plates, the reflective markers, and the EMG analysis sensors. Now, at our hospital here in Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital, uh, Biotech has arranged the whole gait lab, and they have provided all the equipments here. They have helped in setting up the whole gait lab. I will be showing you pictures rather than me just naming them. So this is how the gait lab looks. Now, you can see the cameras on the ceiling, and
Point them out.
yeah, yeah. So the cameras, Poonam is just pointing out the cameras in the lab. They are fixed to the ceiling. And if you can see the force plates, they are placed below. We have two force plates. It's a temporarily fixed force plate there. Okay, thank you, Poonam. Yeah. The cameras, we have 12 infrared cameras. They help in picking up the reflective markers which are stuck on the body. And on the right hand side, you can see the EMG sensors. They are the EMG sensors, and that's the chargeable unit. It is a wireless EMG sensor, okay, and it is connected directly through Wi-Fi through the software. The software which we use here is the motion analysis software. Then the Kistler force plates, which we just showed you, we have purposely placed it in this position because while walking, one foot is ahead and the other behind. That's why the force plates are not kept parallel to each other. Now, I'll be showing you the whole demo of the whole video of the process. Before that, I just wanted you all to know how a calibration L frame looks like, the left-hand side, which is used for static calibration, and the wand and the wand which is used for a dynamic calibration. I hope you can appreciate the picture wherein there are markers stuck on the frames. Okay, I'll be just sharing the video. Just give me a moment. All right. So the first step is the calibration process. Calibration process is mainly, in layman terms, waking up the system, getting the whole system ready. The first step is the static calibration, which is done with the L frame, the picture which I already showed you before. And in this, it also checks whether both the force plates are at the proper level. So that's the end of the static calibration. We move that away, and then we do the dynamic calibration. We use the wand for the dynamic calibration. So we move the wand across the gait lab area. So the person who's sitting at the software end will be able to see on the computer whether all the cameras which are fixed to the ceiling are able to see those markers. So this is the whole process of calibration. And then this entire process takes approximately 5 to 7 minutes. This dialog box comes up from on the system software. Yeah. So the system is ready for use. Now the next part is subject preparation, wherein we first take the anthropometric data collection. Anthropometric data collection is taken with the help of skin calipers and scales. We take the height, weight, foot width, ankle width, knee width, and foot length. This is important because we feed in this data of that particular subject in the software so that the software can make the subject's body model, which is further needed for the study. Yeah. So this is the anthropometric data collection process. The next part is the marker placement. We follow the Helen Hayes marker set. So the reflective markers, which I had shown you the pictures, those reflective markers are stuck onto the body with the help of two-sided adhesive tapes. And the infrared cameras, they pick up these reflective markers. So it's a full body marker set from head to toe. It is important to follow a set marker pattern, and it has to be basically the subject has to have least clothing. To avoid any kind of movement of the marker. ASIS markers are one of the most important markers. So right now she's she's all marked up. This is called as the Helen Hayes marker set. This is what we use in our software. The next part is fixing the EMG sensors. As you can see in the picture, we first clean the area with sterilium or any alcohol-based rub. Then we place the electrodes on the muscle bulk. So with resisted movement, we palpate the muscle bulk and then we place the EMG electrodes. And then comes those sensors, the wireless EMG sensors, with which we fix it and we clip it onto the electrodes. So just for demonstration purpose, we have just chosen the tibialis anterior muscle group in this video. We secure this with the tape or any kind, you can use a micropore tape or any kind of a tape. It's basically to avoid any movement of the EMG electrode or the EMG sensor. Because if there is any movement, we will get a lot of artifacts in the graphs and there will be a lot of noise activity in the whole graph. This is the EMG receiver, which transfers the EMG data into the software. And these are the sensors, which the picture I've already shown you before. We have a 8-channel EMG system. So at a go, we can focus on 4 muscle groups bilaterally. So for gait analysis, we mainly focus on 4 muscle groups: tibialis anterior, quadriceps, hamstrings, and the calf. As per research, these are the most common muscles which we focus for the activity and during walking, during gait analysis. But it is totally on you. You can choose the muscles which you want to analyze depending on the complaints or the study which however you want to conduct. So the person is ready and then starts the last step, which is data collection. First part is the static data collection, wherein the subject is asked to stand on the first plate. This is how the static data looks like. The black dots are the markers on the body which we had fixed, and the red vector. Next is the dynamic data collection. In this case, we are doing a walking study. The subject is advised to take a lot of trials. So we usually take 10 to 15 trials for a particular gait study. This is the whole process of dynamic data collection. Okay, so that's the end of the whole process of how we collect the data. I'll be just switching to the presentation again. Just give me a moment, please. Yeah, so I'll just sum up quickly. The first step was calibration. We did static and dynamic calibration. Second was anthropometric data collection. Then was the marker placement, then the EMG placement, and then was the last part was the data collection, static and dynamic data collection. Okay, so this is a completion. This we finished the data collection part. Next is the data processing, wherein we load the whole data collection part. We run through a software, and then we take at least 2 to 3 best walking trials. We trim the data so that there are good complete 2 to 3 gait cycles. This is how the static data looks like post processing. You can appreciate the vertical GRF vector very clearly. I'll just play this video. This is the dynamic data post processing. The person is placing the foot properly on the force plates. I'll just play this video again. So we have a frontal view and a side view. Okay. So the next part is complete, where the whole data is processed. Then comes reporting. Okay, so here we'll be just taking a quick poll on how many people have seen a gait report before. Mr. Shah?
Yeah, I launched the poll. Now people, you are just requested to answer yes or no. So then we will come to know at the end of the, poll, what is the result. So it may take a little more time.
We'll just wait for a few minutes.
Yeah. we shall stop the poll in few seconds. So participants are requested to please do it at the earliest. Okay, I think we will end the poll now.
Mr. Shah, I'm not able to hear you if you're telling me anything.
Can you hear me? Can you see the poll result?
I can't hear him. Okay, so almost 70% of the whole participant group has not seen a GATE report and 30% have seen it. Okay, great. So the reporting, now the data is gone through the software. Now the software, the data which we receive are in huge Excel sheets, and there are multiple graphs of all kinematics and kinetics data. The joint kinematics and kinetics, they are calculated on the principle of inverse dynamics. You don't need to get into this in detail. I will be explaining the reports in the further slides. Now the components which the details, the information which we get in the GATE analysis study are the temporospatial parameters, the kinematics, the kinetics, and the EMG data. So in temporospatial parameters, we get the information about the step length, the stride length, forward velocity, cadence, total support time, swing phase, initial double support time, single support time, and step width. These are all the details we get about the temporospatial parameters. In kinematics and kinetics, we get info about three planar movements: sagittal, frontal, and transverse of the head position, trunk, shoulders, elbow, pelvis, hip, knee, ankle, and foot. And in kinetics, we get to know about the hip joint, the lower limb joint forces, the joint moments, the joint powers, and GRF. Now, I hope everybody is aware about the gauge cycle, that it comprises of around 60% of stance phase and 40% of swing phase. The initial contact and the toe-off area is the double support time, and the loading response, mid stance, and the terminal stance is the single support time period. Now, in the picture, you can appreciate the dark colored muscle groups are the active muscle groups, and the light colored are the ones which are less active during that phase. So it is very important for you to understand in what phase, which joint and which muscle at what angle they are functioning. Only then you will be able to interpret a GATE report. So the basic, at least you need to know. This is how a temporospatial parameter report looks like. On the left hand side, if you can see the parameters which I had already mentioned, the step length, stride length, forward velocity, and so on are mentioned. In the center, you can see that's the normative data. So normative data is basically for a particular age group. This is the normal range. So for example, for, step length, the normal range for this particular age group is somewhere around 62. Now, the first two columns are, the red column is trial 1 and the blue column is trial 2. The first two columns are basically the data of the right leg, and the next column is the left side data. So that's how you can compare the right and left side data with the normal. So you can accordingly look for the stride length, the forward velocity, the cadence, the total support time, and this is how you will look for the information on a temporospatial parameter report. Okay, so I will be switching next to the kinematics report. Now in this picture, I have just put the hip joint angles. Okay, only this is three planar movements of the hip joint. So the first, on the left hand side, you can see the sagittal planar movement, flexion and extension. Then comes the frontal, abduction and adduction, and transverse planar movement, rotation. Now, in a graph in this, now you can see the first column is the right leg data, and the left column is, and the second column is the left leg data. Now we have taken two trials of this particular subject, and the gray patch, you can see a gray patch in every graph here. That gray patch is the normative data, what I told you, the normal range for this particular age group. And the blue and red graph is the subject's joint angles. Now I'll just show you the magnified image of this. Yeah. So this is just one graph I have magnified here. So it's the flexion extension angle. So the positive part is the flexion and the negative part is extension. Now here you can see the hip, this is the hip flexion extension angle. So the gray patch is the normal range and the blue and red is the subject's joint angle. And also you need to know that this vertical line is the division of the stance phase, which is the first 60%, and the next, on the right hand side is the 40% swing phase. So this is how you will look into the things in a kinematic report. So this I've shown only for one joint. Same thing goes for the knee, wherein you'll get the all planar movements of the knee, the ankle, the head, the trunk, and so on. This is a sample of a report of GRF, of ground reaction force kinetic data. Now you can see the gray patch again in all the graph. This is the normal range for this particular age group, and the blue and the red graph lines are the subjects the GRF graph. So you get the vertical value, the lateral value, and the frontal value. The last one is the EMG report. Now, like I told you, we have a 8-channel EMG system, and so we can target 4 muscles at a go. So in this study, we have taken tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius, hamstrings, and rectus. Now again, in every graph, you can see a gray patch. So the gray patch is basically the active phase of that muscle. So and the blue and red color lines are that particular muscles, the subject's activity. Now, if you can see in the tibialis anterior graph, the first one, the first column, this column is the right side leg, and this side is the left side leg data. Now, the tibialis anterior muscle, if you take in, like you all know, when we first, during initial contact, the foot has to be in dorsiflexion. So the tibialis anterior has to be active. So the initial phase has to have a peak. And then again, during the swing phase, during the initial swing phase, when the person has to clear the ground, again, the ankle has to be in dorsiflexion. So this is again the active phase. So that's how you will appreciate the graph for all the muscles. You can choose any muscle group, whichever you want to target, you want to study for. Okay, so this completes the EMG data reporting. So I've completed the process and going over the clinical applications of gait and motion analysis. Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Poonam Bajaj.
Thank you, Ankita. Good afternoon and hello, everyone. My name is Poonam. Uh, I'm going to be discussing clinical applications essentially. And let's proceed on how and when we use a gate lab. So when does a person do a gate study, and why is it not already so mainstream or common? One, it's a pretty extensive study. It takes an hour and a half to two to do a good complete gate study. From we showed you a very fast forwarded time lapsed video, but uh, it takes an hour and a half to actually put the markers, put the EMGs, make sure you're getting accurate data, and get a good quality analysis. There are wide-ranging applications of a gait study, and they can range from musculoskeletal to pediatrics to neurological conditions. Now, musculoskeletal, you can analyze runners, marathon runners, sprinters, bowling, cricket bowling, and you can analyze weightlifters. You can analyze people with who going undergoing a joint replacement surgery, whether it's TKR or THR. In fact, I know of labs that are dedicated entirely to analyzing pre and post TKR subjects. And then you can analyze people who have various systemic diseases such as ankylosing spondylitis and so much more. Neurologically, is it not important to study the gait of a stroke patient? Extremely salient. And a Parkinsonian gait and ataxias. So in fact, there is sometimes a very important differential diagnosis to be made between patients who have normal pressure hydrocephalus and patients who have Parkinson's, especially in the early stages. Sometimes they are very similar to present with in stage one. And gait study sometimes can tell you uh, the right diagnosis and can get somebody started on the right treatment quite early. Now, where pediatric conditions are concerned, the three that I've written out here, the cerebral palsy, the Duchenne's DMD, and the spina bifida are the most commonly done. There are so many other applications, pigeon-toed gait, and genu valgus, and correction of pre and post tibial osteotomies and corrections of angles, etc. The most important thing is that this study in pediatrics can, in others, in other fields also, but very importantly in pediatrics in CP and DMD, can help in deciding surgery, whether or not to release a particular muscle, whether or not to release an adductor, whether or not to release the calf. And we will see how in a few minutes. So Ankita went through a whole lot of these graphs. I'm just going to go through this in a little more detail. So like you can see, this is a study recently done of a normal asymptomatic subject in her 20s. And like you see, so the step length is, so a normal step length for this age group and anthropometric. So you saw us take the anthropometric data, we enter this into the software, and then we get these normal values, which is right here in the center. These are the normal values. And like you see, this is around 64.88, which is nearly 65. And our subject here is roughly got the same. It's never going to be exact, of course, but it's roughly the same. And I would call this normal, of course. And then there's stride length, which for this age group and anthropometrics is near 130. And our subject is very much close to that. Yeah, maybe in this trial, which is marked in blue, which is a second trial, she's taken a longer stride, completely normal. Similarly, for forward velocity and for cadence and for stance time, which is also known as total support time, it should be around 61%, and our subject is very close to that. and similarly for swing phase and step width. So this is a normative step width, excuse me, and our subject in this stride is very normal, and this stride is showing a narrow step width. So it just points to be noted, but this is largely normal. The head, arms, trunk, and pelvis. Now, I just want to bring before I go ahead. I want to say this one statement which I thought of right now, which said in my head. So, what is kinematics? Kinematics is what the joint is doing. Kinetics is why the joint is doing that. And EMG is how the joint is doing that during a gait cycle. Now, for example, if I have to look at, I'm going to elaborate on this statement. If I have to look at this graph, this is a kinematics graph of the head, arms, trunk, and so this is the head graph. This is the arm graph in the stance phase. What I'm pointing out to you is the stance phase. Like, you know, this is the differentiator between stance ends here and swing begins here. So this is what the arm does during the stance and the swing phase. So like I said, kinematics is what the joint is doing, what the shoulder should be doing, what in the, say, this is flexion extension, so that is your sagittal plane. Shoulder abduction is your frontal plane, and there will be a transverse plane for rotations if you look at the trunk. So transverse plane, sagittal plane, and frontal plane. So this is what the joint is doing. This is the trunk. This is what it should be doing in the stance phase, and this in the swing phase, and this is what it's doing. So this is nearly a normal study. As you see, everything is falling within the gray zone, largely within the gray zone, and what we typically call WNL. Okay. Now, similarly, pelvis rotation. This kinematics we also call as a form of movement. What is the form? Is my form correct? That is what a lot of people ask physiotherapists, and we often give feedback on that. So this is the most objective feedback on form, kinematics. Now, if you notice, pelvic tilt is within gray range. This is a pelvic obliquity and pretty much following it to the T. I do find a little diminished pelvic rotation pre-swing in this subject. Asymptomatic, normal, young person in her 20s. Okay, so let's have a look at hip, knee, ankle, and foot now. Literally, again, our same subject is followed. This is what the hip should be doing in the sagittal plane, in flexion extension, in the frontal plane, abduction, adduction, and at which phase in the gait cycle, and rotations in the transverse plane. And if I had to look at her knee joint ankles, pretty much following the graph to a T. And I do find some problem here in the tibial torsion. This is not falling in the gray zones, neither in the stance nor in the swing. And it's excessively internally rotated. Now, biomechanics is a study of chains. We all know that. Do you think the lack of pelvic rotation may be contributing to a compensation in the tibial torsion? I think so. And sorry about that. And if I were to look at her ankles, they are largely completely normal, maybe slightly supinated, but and if I were to look at tibial rotations, again, the foot, if I have to look at the foot, is slightly toed in. Now the foot follows the tibia, the ankle follows the tibia, and if there is a tibial torsion abnormality, there has to be a compensatory chain mechanism at the ankle foot region. So this is the beauty, as I call it, of biomechanics and the whole chain reaction. Again, I would like to say this is a completely normal asymptomatic person, and this is a study which is completely within normal limits. Now, kinetics. Kinematics is what the joint does. Kinetics is how the joint does it. So if a person is walking, the foot is planted on the floor and the tibia is moving forward and the ankle joint is dorsiflexing. So kinetics is how it is doing that. Let us have a look at hip kinetics, knee kinetics, and ankle kinetics. So for the sake of this webinar, we have largely looked at lower quarter biomechanics, and of course gait studies are done with plates. I mean, it's the foot and the lower quarter that is contacting the force plate. So we will be focusing more on the lower quarter. Now, if you look at the gray zones, in all these graphs, whether it's hip, knee, or ankle, this person is showing higher values. This individual is showing a good graph pattern, but is showing higher values, which means, so if we are looking at hip joint movements, okay, if we are looking at hip forces and hip movements, that means there is excessive muscle contraction and it is almost double of what it should be, and it's even going up to 6 times of body weight in some planes. So this is a normal person with almost no problems in form, but what we found is that there is excessive muscle work going on, so there's lack of efficiency in muscle work. Now, you and I know that this is extremely common, and 40 years down the line, this person need to have excessive degenerative changes in their joints because of excessive forces and excessive movements. So this person, if they were to come to you for preventive therapy, you would really work on their muscles. You would really work on strengthening their muscles and getting them to absorb shock better. A little more on that in a few slides. Similarly, if you're looking at knee joint forces and you're looking at knee joint moments, you're seeing excessive values, and it's between 1 and 1.5 times of body weight when it should be just about 0.40 here is normal, but it's nearly 1 to 1.5. And similarly, if you look at ankle forces and ankle moments, they are excessive. So efficiency is quite an issue in this normal asymptomatic subject. Now, let's talk a little bit about ground reaction forces. I just want to show you a diagram. I'm gonna come back to this later, but I'm coming to a ground reaction force. Newton's law of action reaction, simple. We learned this in 7th grade in school. For every action, there is an equal and an opposite reaction. For every time the foot hits the ground hits back at the foot and hits back at you. And that is known as the ground reaction force vector, like you see here. Now, what is the ground reaction force vector doing? In this case, this is the tibia, this is the foot. What is it doing? the ground reaction force vector is in front of the ankle. Joint is in front of the axis of the ankle and is causing a external dorsiflexion moment. Okay, because it is in front of the ankle. What does the body do to counter that? It activates the plantar flexors to counter this external moment. So the body internal movement is plantar flexion to counter an external dorsiflexion movement. This is the foundation of kinetics. This is important. It is the position of the ground reaction force vector which determines what is going to happen at a particular joint. If it is in front of the ankle axis, it will cause dorsiflexion. If it is behind, it will cause plantar flexion. It is true. This is true for all joints. Okay, so let's come back to our GRF and joint bars. We have a graph in the gait analysis study that measures ground reaction forces. It measures, now ground reaction forces are in all three planes, frontal, sagittal and transverse. So again, our subject has very high vertical, lateral and frontal ground reaction forces. It's in a gait study, it should be anywhere around body weight. This is 1 times body weight. Okay. However, our subject has between 4 and 5 times body weight, and excessively in the vertical direction and also in the lateral and the frontal planes. So we took a normal subject, but we ended up finding an issue. Now, sagittal joint bars, similar. Every joint, now I said when the ground hits at you, I'm sorry, when your foot hits the ground and the ground hits back at you, the joint has to shock absorb and certain power has to be generated to do the shock absorption. So here are the generation and absorption graphs, and again you see that there are excessively generated forces at the hip, the knee and the ankle. They are very much higher, nearly 15 times body weight at the ankle and about 2 times body weight near the hip. Now, this makes sense because when you hit the foot, the first part that gets the shock is the foot, and it is attenuated as it goes up the biomechanical chain. So it is the ankle which has to generate so much power. The heel rocker, the forefoot rocker has to generate the power to absorb all these ground reaction force effects. So this is kinetics. It is how the body is dealing with gravity and body weight and the interaction whilst walking. Kinematics is what the body is doing during a gait cycle. Kinetics is how the body is dealing with that. And EMG is which muscles are dealing with that. So, like Ankita mentioned, we have the most commonly studied muscles are the tibialis anterior, the gastrocnemius, hams and the recti, and these are the active phases. You can see how nicely the graph shows in which part of the gait cycle these muscles are active, and we know if it's delayed activation, if it's early activation, if it's in phase activation, and we can therefore treat a patient accordingly. Okay, so let's now discuss. Am I running out of time? Okay, let's discuss these three conditions: running, Parkinson's disease, and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So running is So we study a lot of marathon runners in our lab, and we will be discussing largely the marathon running in this talk. In runners, you can have you basically have stance which is less than 40% and swing which is more than 60%. And as the speed increases, the amount of time spent in stance decreases. So that much is obvious. You can make out here that this is less than 40% of the gait cycle and swing is more than 60% of the gait cycle. Now, this is what the literature says on normal kinematics of running, normal running form. How much should the hip flex, how much should the knee flex, and at which phase in the gait cycle, and at how much should the ankle dorsiflex, where is the person contacting the ground, whether it's a heel contact, whether it's midfoot contact, whether in a sprinter, it's sprinters obviously contact on their forefoot. So all of these things is kinematics, and this is the literature. I've given you the reference at the end of the presentation. By no means is this the only literature. There is tons of literature on kinematics of running. And this is what I would like to show you our graphs of our runners look like. Okay, so if I have to, so we've taken the red and the blue, as you see, is right and left. And if you look at flexion extension, dorsiflexion, this is the ankle. Let me zoom back again. This is, we're talking about the ankle. And as you see, so this graph is of an excellent marathon runner with almost perfect form, and has been running for more than 25 years. And you can see graphs. If you look at this graph of dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, it almost follows the textbook. So literally, maybe some graphs are meant to make textbooks. So this is of a normal runner. Literally, you can tell that this person's kinematics, that is form, is excellent. If you were to look at knee kinematics again, now I want to bring out this point here. This is an artifact. Like I said, gait studies are quite an extensive study, and sometimes this may be just a movement artifact. You can even see sometimes artifacts in x-rays. No investigation is completely perfect, very honestly. So just to point that out. Now if you look at knee flexion extension, oh, but there's so much more flexion in the textbook. No, but what you need to do is look at the degrees. Okay, so there's nearly between 90 and 100 degrees of knee flexion in the swing phase to clear. And our subject here also has between 90 and 100 degrees of knee flexion. So our curves are flatter than the textbook. I wish we could say the same for Corona. We really need to flatten the curve. Anyway, getting back to the knee. Knee adduction pretty much follows the textbook where the peaks are concerned in swing phase, in stance phase. Similarly for rotations. Like I said, this is a normal runner. And similarly for the hip. Okay, I'm not going to elucidate further. I already explained this earlier to you. Let's have a look at our runner's kinetics. So hip kinetics in running is very similar to walking kinetics. Okay, and if you're going to, I'm not here, and it says hip flexion moments, adduction, and internal rotation, whereas our runner here has extension, abduction, external rotation. Don't forget, we have joint moments in our lab. We have external moments. The literature is talking about internal moments. So they are very, very easily comparable by just a switch of a button. So don't be confused about that. And once again, let's have a look at how much it should be. Okay, so our runner here should have about 0.25 times body weight of rotation, versus our runner here has almost 1 time body weight. Okay, so here is the efficiency, the muscle efficiency, even though the form is perfect, was the problem. And hence simple strengthening exercises was what made our runner even better and more efficient. Similarly, for the knee joint, and I'd like to bring up the ankle. If you look at plantar flexion, or it should be about 2 times of body weight, whereas our runner had nearly 10 times of body weight, which is what was causing lack of efficiency in running. So simple calf strengthening exercises is what made our runner even better than what perform better in the marathon than what break his own previous records. Let me put it that way. And essentially, it also told us where the injury could have come from. If this is 10 times body weight versus 2 times body weight, isn't it obviously going to create injuries? So it's important to do a gait study as a preventive sometimes, not even as a treatment. You don't have to wait for the injury to come. Now, if you're looking at this runner and you're thinking that where is the form going wrong, what is going wrong, you can't see the calf contracting less. You saw this runner's form was near perfect, near textbook. But there are some simple muscle weaknesses that are not visible, and that's what a gait study can tell. Now, if I have to go back, if I have to go now and look at our runner's EMG, see the calf is contracting late in the cycle, and that's strength and timing. So all we did was work on a calf drill, and there you go, bingo, broke his own record. Now, this is the case study of a marathon runner who came to us about 4 or 5 days before the marathon, 2020 marathon. And thank you. With anterior tibial pain, and also calf pain, more on the right, on and off. Not while walking or doing his work, but only after 10K running. Now, this guy had trained for the full year and had been on a strengthening program with a trainer. And this is 5 days before the marathon. So obviously we will look at the shin, we'll look at the ankle, we'll look at the knee, we'll do it all. We did a gait study, a running study. And if you look at the form of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, bingo, it follows the textbook. It could make the textbook. Pronation, supination, foot progression. I mean, I couldn't make a better textbook image than this. If I look at the knee, look at the kinematics, the form, bingo. Like it's over 80, under 100, bingo. I mean, I couldn't make a better textbook. So there was nothing wrong with the ankle and with the knee. And the guy comes to me with shin pain after 10K of running. I look at the hip. Nothing wrong. Follows the textbook. I go to the pelvis, kinematics. And here is the problem. This right hip was almost dipped throughout stance and swing, and the left hip was hiked throughout stance and swing. And similarly with pelvic rotation, throughout stance and swing, this hip was extended and this hip was forward. So this guy's improper pelvic trunk mechanism, maybe a little bit of a, I can't call it a Trendelenburg, but somewhat similar to a Trendelenburg, was causing shin pain 10 kilometers after running. So like I told you, this is a chain of events. I earlier gave you an example of something going wrong below and the effect, lack of pelvic rotation in our normal asymptomatic subject leading to a toed-in gait. Okay, that is top down in the chain. This is bottoms up. This is a shin problem because of a pelvic problem. The biomechanical chain is quite beautiful, and you just need to know how to study it and you need to know how to treat it. So we didn't treat our marathon runners ankle, knee, leg. We didn't tape it. We didn't do any of that. We just gave him strengthening and core stabilization, much to his surprise. Let's look at a neurological condition now. Features of a Parkinsonian gait. Now, Parkinsonism. Okay, how many, Mr. Shah? Poll 2.
Yeah.
How
Sure.
many people would strengthen a calf?
Okay, I've launched the poll. So just 5 more seconds and then we will stop the poll. So we end the poll now and I'm sharing the results.
All right,
So it's very close.
I have 53% yes and 48% no. So it's almost 50-50. Now, let's see what we should do. Now, what happens in Parkinsonism? We all know there's shuffling gait. We all know there's bradykinesia. We know there's slowing down. Now, the kinetics and the kinematics. The first thing that picks up a Parkinsonian gait in objectively, that is a 3D gait and motion analysis, is reduction of plantar flexion excursion. That is your diagnostic feature. And in kinetics, it's reduction of ankle push off bar and hip pull off bar. So this is the pre-swing phase and the initial swing phase. You have to, it is the hip that, it is a hip flexor, that is the whip, in the words of Christopher Paz of USC, the whip that brings your leg forward in swing, and it is the push off from the toes, the calf, that gives you the swing. And this is what is missing, which is why they spend much more time in stance phase as compared to normal people. And so this is our Parkinsonian patient. And if you were to look at swing phase is almost half of what it should be. Okay, swing phase is, it should be 40%, it's about 20%, 24% in some of our trials, 23, 26, it's much less than what it should be. And if you were to look at stance phase, it's 80% instead of 60%, between 75 and 80%. Okay, so they don't have a good swing phase. Now, their step length should be around this, but it's 1/3 of what it should be. And their forward velocity should be around this, and it's 1/5 of what it should be. Okay, so that is something you should know. Now, if you were to look at form, I said there is reduction of ankle plantar flexion at 50 to 60% of the gait cycle. And if you look at this, 50 to 60% of the gait cycle is somewhere here. And you see it's not plantar flexing at, it's almost it's not even, it's sub-zero. Plantar flexion doesn't even occur until neutral on the right side for this patient. It's at least hitting about 10 degrees on the left. So reduction of ankle plantar flexion. And if you had to look at the hip, significant reduction of the hip should flex at least 20 degrees here, but it's so low. You can clearly see the right side is more affected than the left. And look at the moments, so high. The muscles are trying so hard, but they're not able to create enough form. Even though the muscles are overworking to 3 times of body weight, they're not able to create appropriate form at the hip, the knee, the ankle, which is why the parameters of Parkinsonian people are poor. They are working so hard but not succeeding. Okay, makes sense? Now the EMG, it's almost like a flat line. It's delayed in the swing phase, it's just not working in the stance phase in the calf. Okay, so the answer to the question was, you are going to definitely work on the plantar flexors of people with Parkinsonism. You're going to really work hard on them because they are the crucial factor. And you're also going to work hard on the swing phase. You're also going to work hard on the hip flexor pull-off bar. So that is the reason why, this is the largest reason why it is so important to work on ankle plantar flexors and hip flexors. Now, let's come to Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. I think we're on time. Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, as you know, is a condition affecting mostly young children. It is an X-linked inherited disease of the muscles. And where does gait study come in with Duchenne's? Serial gait studies are very, very useful in Duchenne's, in DMD, to maintain the ambulatory phase. It is crucial to maintain the ambulatory phase of children with Duchenne's. Maintaining ambulation is prolonging lifespan for them. So if we all know that there is pseudo hypertrophy of the calf, there is tightness of the hip flexors, tightness of the IT band, weakness of the glutes, we know that. But do we know when a child is likely to stop ambulating. An objective way of that is to do a gait study. Do we know how much longer a child has in the ambulatory phase? An objective way, once again, is to decide with a gait study. Should we do a surgical lengthening of a child of the calf if the child has gone into toe walking or not? Now that is what a gait study helps us to decide. So the kinematics, kinetics are well known, and the literature I've given you. I'm going to show this to you. If you look at the hip and the knee and the ankle, you will see decreased hip flexion. So there's decreased pull off. You will see increased knee flexion to clear the ground, because the most common thing is toe walking, and so there's lack of dorsiflexion during swing. So you will see increased knee flexion to clear the ground. You will see decreased hip flexion. Okay, I'm not putting ankle graph. I haven't put it because it's obvious. Now, look at the gastrocnemius. Barely contracting, pretty much flatline, doesn't contract when it should, but is working hard in the swing, which is what is making the knee flex higher to clear the ground. Okay, so flatline of the gastrocnemius, but this is a toe walker. Now, again, if I were to show you this graph of this particular child, the gastrocnemius is not working, but child is a toe walker, and there's very high amounts of plantar flexion, very high. Would you release the calf? Mr. Shah, poll 3.
Yes, 1 second. Yes, the poll is launched. Last 5 seconds. Okay. These are the results.
So 45% participants would say yes, go for surgery for this toe walker, and 56% would say no. Now, this was done in 2017. I'd said no surgery because DMD muscle weakness, but still toe walking because of myofascial tightnesses. If you release the myofascia, you lose ambulation. So now this is a personal opinion, a personal clinical judgment, and this was done in 2017. Child is still ambulatory, no surgery. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Here are the references, and a big special thank you to Dr. Shreya Gala and Dr. Tanushree Bhatt for having helped with the video of the GATE study. And I think we are bang on time. Yes? Ready for questions and answers.
Yeah, in Q&A section, ma'am, there are questions.
Can't hear you, Mr. Shah.
You can't hear me?
1 second, I think we need to change.
No, we don't.
Is it locked?
You can check in Q&A section, and there are questions which people have asked, which we request you to please
Mr. Shah,
answer.
we're
We
not
have.
able to hear
We
you.
can't hear you.
Just give us a minute. We escape this.
Rajiv, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Deepak. Can you hear Dr. Poonam?
No, I think there is some issue there.
Yeah, Mr. Shah, we are not able to hear you.
But just answer the question.
Ankita, can you hear me? Ankita? Poonam ma'am, can you hear me?
We do stop share and then.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, Mr. Shah, and come back again into the meeting. Okay?
Yeah. Stop share. He's unmute, right? Mr. Shah, can you unmute it?
Mr. Shah, you're on mute.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Okay, good. No?
No, no, no.
Just answer the questions. Just answer the
Okay.
questions.
Oh, there are 22 questions approx.
What is the name of the board written? Ankita, come. What is the name of the board written 1 and 2 in the video? Answer live. Would you like to take that?
Name of the board.
The force plates.
Oh, those are the force plates. So there are 2 force plates. So number 1 and number 2. So they are just numbered. That's it.
Step and stride length are normalized.
Step length and stride length don't need to be normalized by weight and
No,
height.
no.
Step length and stride length don't need to be normalized by body weight or body height.
TKR, I'll take that. Total knee replacement. TKR by Kiran Parihar, total knee replacement, pre and post knee replacements. Charmi Shah, can we have abnormal range? I'll take that. Abnormal can be infinite. As you know, no one patient is alike, and it's completely it's individual. So there are known abnormal kinematics and kinetics in certain diseases such as DMD and Parkinson's, which I covered, I think, subsequent to your question. So I guess that has answered your question.
Kinesiotaping provides a proprioceptive impulse and modifies the forces and force production. What is your take on that while applying all these sensors, will it not alter the proprioceptive impulse?
Yes, we don't do this with
We
kinesiotaping.
don't use kinesio tape. We either use a micropore tape or it's
That was not kinesiotape.
didn't
That
use a
was
kinesiotape.
Coban. On the video, that was Coban. It's not. Oh, we're not audible. We're audible. We got okay.
We are getting few things on the chat, so
Oops.
minimize that.
Yeah. So that was not kinesiotape. That was Coban. It just keeps the EMG sensor in place.
It's just to secure them, just to keep it in place. We are not using kinesio.
No, we
tape
never
on that.
do, because that alters the that definitely it's, I mean, it's not reliable, like you said. That's Dr. Jitendra Munjal. From Dr. Tadikonda. Do you check ROM and muscles prior? Yes, in most cases
Yes,
we
the
do.
clinical examination
In clinical
is-
examination prior to a gait study, we do. We never do a gait study as a first analysis. You select the patient that goes for a gait study. Like I said, it's an extensive test. Of course, if you know that a person has been referred, like a child with CP or DMD has been referred only for a gait study, you do that. But if it's a pure biomechanical analysis, you definitely do a clinical testing of the range of motion.
whether it is a musculoskeletal assessment or it is a
neurological
neurological
assessment.
We do our clinical examination before conducting the gait study.
Yes. Which book is this?
I think it's about the moments picture which you put in. I think it is about that.
So my references are on the slide, and I think you'll be able to get the link. So it's Ditchery. It's an article by Jay Ditchery.
We'll be sharing this
Anonymous
presentation
attendee.
once it is over. By tomorrow.
Anonymous attendee, could you please explain which muscles are generators and which are absorbers? So that depends on the phase of the gait.
One muscle is never always a generator or always a absorber. It keeps on shifting. It keeps on changing and depending on different phases of gait.
Could you please tell how joint power is different from muscle power? Anonymous attendee. Powers, if you're looking at the power slide, you're looking, a muscle is a particular muscle. Whereas when you're saying joint powers, you're seeing which aspect of the joint, whether it is the anterior aspect or the posterior aspect of the joint. And hence it is external moments, which are joint moments, and internal moments, which are muscle moments.
What kind of exercise program you will give to a normal subject whose graph was shown? Okay, she showed higher ground reaction forces.
So Dr. Preeti Shah, what kind of exercise program will you give to the normal subject? Hi, Dr. Preeti. I would give a lot of strengthening, weight bearing, close kinetic chain, eccentric and plyometric exercises to improve shock absorption, because like we said, her form was nearly textbook, but it was her muscle, lower quarter muscle ability to absorb the ground reaction forces. So a lot of plyometric
on
and
eccentric work.
Shock absorption exercises in closed kinetic chain position.
So if a patient is a road traffic accident case with multiple lower limb fractures with shortening, then how do we take anthropometric data with modified footwear, and which we take normal the person should be able to at least take few steps, because to do a gait study, the person should be able to walk either with assistance like assistive devices or in independent walking. So, and the anthropometric data, we can always take it, and it should be without any footwear. It's the foot length and the foot width and ankle width and the knee width. and which normative data. Normative data is totally on the, it depends on the age group. It does not depend whether the person is wearing a shoes or any modification. It's not on that. A norm from 10 to 12 years age group, that they have a set normative data. And also after modification, yeah, you want to add something?
I just want to add a little bit about all over the world, not only here. Normative data was initially panned out as a whole, like between 20 and 30 years of age, like per decade. This would be normal step length, step width, etc. Then between 31 and 40, between 41 and 50, etc. Achieved bone and joint maturity would have very similar data. The only thing that would vary would be the height, the weight, and the actual individual anthropometrics.
Yeah.
So, like I said, this is open to discussion, but normative data is considered to be quite the same after bone and skeletal maturity, irrespective of the population you're looking at.
That's why we take, for every subject, we take a separate anthropometric
Yes,
data.
every single subject has separate anthropometric data that we showed on the video, which I think some of y'all couldn't see, but I think that link will be shared.
Yeah. Due to network issues, the video went, there was lag in the video. So,
what is step width? Step width is the distance between the 2 feet when the person is standing in normal stance.
I think that textbook thing is the one.
Which textbook is this? Same thing. Article by J. Ditchery. It's in the references. Meaning, did it, Kinjal Shah, did it give artifacts in the study? Yes, sometimes you get a little abnormal marker, which you have to learn how to recognize and not ignore the rest of a good study. Like I said, no investigation is perfect. Sometimes gate studies also have artifacts. If there are too many artifacts, you discard it and redo it. But if it's one off,
that's why we take an average of at least 2 to 3 trials.
Yes.
So at least out of all those trials, if there is a abnormal an artifact, we come to know about it.
Yes, and every single gate study. So this is just a little personal input. Ankita and I do a blind analysis.
Yeah.
We do it separately. We don't look at each other's analysis
The
in the sense the
part.
processing on the computer, and then we compare and combine so that we are doubly sure that we are doing this correctly. Can't hear. That is what
type of people do we really advise for gait analysis? Poonam has already mentioned, we take in a lot of musculoskeletal cases, whether it is a biomechanical deformity or shin pain, runners, TKR, pre and post. In pediatrics, we take CP, cerebral palsy, DMD, and spina bifida, Parkinson's, stroke patients,
ataxias. What type of people, I would like to bring in one point. We sometimes decide orthotics based on a gait study.
Yeah.
A lot of people, we have seen a lot of people with PPRP, post polio residual palsy, and we decide orthotics based on the kinetics and the kinematics of a gait study. So orthotic decision is also very, not only surgery, but orthotic decision is also a major part of gait study planning. What are the
common kinematic gait deviations found in knee OA patients?
Knee OA patients.
Yeah, so due to pain, they might be having less knee range of motion. So again, if there and compensations below on the ankle, most commonly there is valgus or varus deformity, depending on the biomechanical changes what are happening.
So tibial varus, the for the foot pronation. If you want to look at this, you will see this whole chain of biomechanics.
Also,
And
the medial knee joint.
Very high. The valgus forces are very high. Mr. Shah, we'll figure out how to send the references, please. From Dr. Gogri, Pritesh Gogri, can amputees for lower limb also undergo gait study? Yes, absolutely. It's a very useful study for amputees and for whether the prosthesis is doing adequate shock absorption after fitting. Cannot hear. In a mobile, from Dr. Amanditya Kumar, in a mobile flat feet condition, what do you think, which muscle plays a major role in comparison to tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior? So based on my clinical knowledge, I would say tibialis posterior largely. Weakness of the tibialis posterior, we've seen that. So we can't analyze the EMG of a small muscle as a and deep muscle as a tibialis posterior in a gait lab,
because these are surface
these are surface EMGs, like you saw those flat EMGs. What for tibialis posterior you would need needle EMG. We don't do invasive needle EMG. I don't think it's done in the country except on a research basis. So it's not done for gait analysis clinically in any hospital setup. So so clinically, I would answer your question, tibialis posterior. You want to take that?
15-year-old boy of Genu Valgam plays
Dr.
tennis.
Archana.
Okay. What can be done to improve his performance? He's not able to run fast. So there can be a lot of things contributing to Genu Valgam, whether it is the hip, the femur positions, the femoral head positions, or only the knee joint movements, as in basically the knee joint causing the Genu Valgam, the tibia, the torsions in the tibia. So there are a lot of things which need to be analyzed before coming to a conclusion and giving a exercise program to improve his performance, according to me.
And for not being able to run fast enough, again, there could be many reasons. There could be lack of training. There could be just simple calf weakness. It could be nothing related to do with the valgus. Cost of the study, I think, is out of the scope of this academic session. We will answer that question separately anytime. You can ask us or our call center. Can you please, Dr. Anita Kumaravelan, can you please explain how gait analysis can help in differential diagnosis? Sure. Normal pressure hydrocephalus and Parkinsonian gait in the initial stages is one of the most important examples. And it's very difficult to distinguish between the shuffling gait of normal pressure hydrocephalus and also Parkinson's. Like I said, Parkinsonism has very classic decrease in stride length, very classic normal step width, whereas normal pressure hydrocephalus has a high amount of variability in the temporospatial parameters. So the temporospatial parameters that will be picked up will tell you the difference. And this is just one objectively. And this will help in whether they should do a CSF tap or not. For someone with a normal pressure hydrocephalus, a CSF tap, a therapeutic tap, is sometimes a diagnostic, but that's an invasive surgical procedure with its complications. The gait study is far less invasive and far easier to do than a CSF tap? I think we have a lot of questions and we've run out of time. Therefore, Dr. Ankita and I will get to emailing these questions. Yes, is that okay? It's almost 3:40, 3:35,
Yeah.
40.
Yeah, we can't hear you,
So-
Mr. Deepak Rao.
So,
Yeah, that's okay.
so what we will do is we will try and answer these questions by email, and of course it will take little time, but by tomorrow at least we will share our video. We have recorded this webinar, so you will get it in your mailbox, the link to watch it again, and we will see how best we can share the answers to all your questions. That is what we have to see. But I really want to thank you, Dr. Poonam, all the participants, everybody, Dr. Ankita. Thank you very much. And I think it was a great webinar, and we may do it again. Thank you very much. Thank you all the participants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Take care.